My brother was pouring himself a glass of sweet tea when he told me he'd been using my social security number to run a business. He said it the same way he might mention he'd borrowed my car. Low-key, casual, like it was a thing that happens and probably isn't a big deal. It was just easier. Your credit's clean. My mother was at the stove. She didn't turn around. My father had appeared in the kitchen doorway by then, and he listened to what I said next, and then he said something I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He said, "If this gets out, it could hurt all of us." I set the IRS notice on the counter. I picked up my keys, I left. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. By the time I was done, I had submitted formal filings to the IRS, the FBI, and the lending institution. 3 different agencies, the same airtight record, built the same way I build every audit file at work. My brother had spent 14 months treating my name like a resource he was entitled to use. He had no idea that I had spent the previous 11 days doing what I do best, following the paper trail all the way back to him. Before I get into the story, hit like and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had someone treat your trust like a blank check they didn't need permission to cash. Your comments remind me I'm not alone in this. My name is Taryn Shelby. If you ask the people in my family to describe me, they would probably say something like dependable, the one who answers her phone, the one who always has a spare set of keys, a spare hour, a spare amount of grace, the one who doesn't cause problems. They're not wrong. I've spent a lot of years being exactly that person. What they've never quite understood is that calm isn't the same as passive, and patience is not the same as permission. Still water can carry a current you never see until it moves. My brother Royce is 4 years older than me. He has always filled every room he entered in a way I found exhausting and my parents found magnetic. Growing up outside Nashville, Franklin, Tennessee, suburb houses and wide streets, and Saturday farmers markets, my family looked like a certain kind of picture from the outside. Our home had a porch with a swing on it, the smell of something baking most Sundays, a yard my father kept trimmed to within an inch of its life. Warm, settled. Inside, we each had a role. Royce performed. My parents applauded. I handled whatever was left. He'd cycled through enough ventures by his early 30s that I'd lost count. A car detailing business that folded before summer was out. A drop-shipping operation he abandoned mid-launch after one bad review. A real estate licensing course he never finished. Each time, my parents responded the same way, not with disappointment, but with a kind of reset, like erasing a whiteboard and saying, "Okay, what's next?" They had an infinite supply of fresh starts for him. I'd never thought to ask whether they'd have extended the same supply to me, because I'd never needed it. I didn't run ventures. I built things quietly and held them. 2 months before everything came apart, we had Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Good dishes out, the table set with a tablecloth that only came out for company or holidays. Royce arrived 45 minutes late in a truck I didn't recognize, wearing new boots, talking before he was even through the door about a consulting firm he'd just launched. He had clients, he said. 2, already. He was building a website. He was thinking about a small office space downtown. My parents leaned forward in unison, the way they always did when Royce was in motion, some instinct in them lighting up every time he announced a new direction. When he finally looked my way, he asked how things were going at the accounting place, and then answered a question my father hadn't finished asking yet. I smiled and passed the rolls and ate my dinner. I was used to the orbit of that room. I had been navigating it since childhood. But on the drive back to Nashville that night, something stayed with me. Not the old ache of being peripheral. I'd made peace with that years ago. This was something sharper. Something off in the math of what Royce had described. New truck, new boots. Talk of office space and clients, plural, before the website was even built. I know how businesses start. I work inside their financial structures every day. And the picture he was painting didn't line up with the timeline he'd given, or the state of his finances the last time my mother had mentioned them in passing. I told myself I was imagining it. I drove home, I made tea and went to bed. I should have trusted the instinct. I never don't trust it at work. With family, you learn to talk yourself out of it. The IRS notice arrived on a Thursday, forwarded to my apartment from my parents' address with a yellow sticker on it. They had received it first. I didn't think much of that. Some of my mail still occasionally drifted there. I almost threw it away unopened, assuming it was a standard notice about something routine. What stopped me was the business name printed on the envelope: Shelby Meridian Consulting LLC, my last name, my first initial. A company I had never heard of, never registered, never signed anything for in my life. I opened it standing in my building's mailroom. I read it once quickly and then again slowly. A federal employer identification number associated with my Social Security number. Income passed through the entity in the prior tax year, a request for clarification on a filing discrepancy. My hands didn't shake, my stomach didn't drop. What happened instead was the feeling I get when a complicated file at work finally resolves. When the numbers that weren't adding up suddenly reveal what they were hiding all along: a stillness, a direction. I drove to Franklin. Royce was there, as he often was on Thursdays. My mother was cooking. My father was in the living room with the game on. I walked into the kitchen, set the envelope on the counter, and asked, as evenly as I could, if anyone could tell me about Shelby Meridian Consulting. The pause lasted long enough to confirm everything I needed to know. My brother picked up the envelope, read the letter, set it back down. "It was just easier to use your info," he said. "You've got a solid credit profile. Mine's shot right now. I needed the LLC to look clean to bring in clients." I said very quietly, "Royce, that's fraud." He made a face like I'd overreacted to a typo. "It's not fraud. You're my sister. I was going to tell you." After 14 months. I've been busy. He said it without irony, without embarrassment, just a statement of fact delivered to the air between us. My mother turned from the stove then, finally. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. He's working on something real this time. You know how hard he's been trying." "He registered a business in my name," I said. "He used my Social Security number without my knowledge. He's been filing documents as me for over a year." My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the quiet. He took in the envelope, the expression on my face, the posture of my brother, who had already settled into leaning against the counter like this, was a minor inconvenience. Everyone would eventually move past. "How much has passed through the account?" I asked. Royce looked at the ceiling. "Around 120. I didn't need him to say 1,000. I already knew. My father let out a slow breath. "Taryn, if this gets out, it could hurt all of us." I looked at him. I don't think I have ever felt as alone in that kitchen as I did in that moment. All of us. As if the harm had been evenly distributed. As if I was an equal stakeholder in the risk, rather than the person whose identity was sitting at the center of it. "You knew," I said. Neither of them answered, which was an answer. I picked up the envelope. I said I needed some time to think. My mother called after me as I walked to the front door. "Don't do anything dramatic. We can work this out as a family." And I kept walking. I got in my car. I sat in their driveway for 4 minutes, watching the porch light hold steady. Then I drove home. At my desk, the city hummed outside my window. I made tea I didn't drink. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder and named it the way I name every case file at work, clearly, with a date, and then I started building. Over the next 11 days, I did not contact my brother or my parents, except once, when I texted my mother to say I needed a little space. She replied with a heart emoji. She had decided my silence was acceptance. It was not the first time someone in that family had made that mistake. It was the last. Using the EIN from the IRS notice, I traced the LLC through public Tennessee business registry records. My legal name on the filing, my Social Security number as the registered agent, my old address, my parents' house, the one I'd moved from 2 years before, listed as the principal place of business. The registration date, 16 months ago. 2 months before Royce had mentioned anything resembling a business at any family gathering. I pulled my full credit report. The business credit line was there. $120,000, opened through a regional lender I had never walked into. Payments had been made on it, small, consistent, just enough to keep the account from triggering a delinquency flag. Someone had thought this through. Someone had intended it to remain invisible indefinitely. What that someone hadn't accounted for was that the person whose name they'd used does this for a living. I documented the bank records I could access through formal channels. I pulled the tax filings submitted in my name. I found the business email address, registered to a domain that routed back to an account in my brother's name. I found the client invoices, real clients, 2 of them, who had paid real money into an account I had never authorized. I found the expenses he'd run through it, a lease deposit on an office space he'd toured once, equipment purchases, travel he'd expensed that my mother's social media posts made clear were personal trips with his girlfriend. I built the chain, date by date, dollar by dollar, document by document, not out of anger. Anger had moved through me somewhere around day 3 and come out the other side into something cooler and more certain. I built it because this was what the situation required, and because I was the only person in a position to do it correctly. The night before I filed, I sat with the completed folder open in front of me for a long time. Not because I was uncertain. I had been certain for days. I sat with it because I wanted to be clear-eyed about what I was doing and what it would set in motion. I thought about my brother saying I was going to tell you, as if the intention were a currency that covered the debt. I thought about my father saying it could hurt all of us. The most honest thing he'd said to me in years, just with the wrong us in mind. I thought about my mother's heart emoji. Then I clicked file, then I did it twice more. IRS complaint, 9:47 a.m. FBI financial crimes tip with the full documentation packet, 10:22 a.m. Formal identity theft affidavit to the lender with supporting records, 11:09 a.m. By noon, 3 agencies had received the same story from 3 different angles, organized the way I organize everything, which is to say, clearly enough that there was no room for ambiguity. I went back to work. I stopped by my supervisor's office and told him I discovered a personal identity theft situation I had already reported through proper channels, and that if anything involving my professional credentials surfaced, he would hear it from me first. He looked at me for a moment, thanked me for the heads up, and that was the end of it. I had spent real energy dreading that conversation. It turned out to take 40 seconds. The contact came on a Friday morning. 2.5 weeks later, my brother called from my parents' house. His voice was different, the easy confidence stripped out of it, something smaller and more careful in its place. Federal investigators came to my door, he said. Did you do this? Yes. A long pause. Taryn, you went federal over this? You filed tax documents in my name for over a year. You ran $120,000 through an account registered to my social security number. You committed wire fraud, identity theft. You forged my information on federal filings. So yes, I was going to pay it back. I know you believe that, I said. I'll let the process run from here. He said my name one more time, something between a question and a plea. I told him I hoped things went as smoothly as they could. Then I ended the call. I went to my parents' house 2 days later, not because anyone summoned me, because I knew them well enough to know there would be a reckoning, and I wanted to walk into it on my own terms, rather than wait for it to find me. The living room felt different when I arrived. Smaller somehow. The familiar lamps were on. The family photos lined the hallway the way they always had. My brother at graduation. My brother at his first apartment. My brother and my parents on the beach vacation I'd missed, because I was covering a client audit and told them to go without me. I stopped in that hallway and looked at all of it for a moment. Not with grief, with something clearer than that. I had spent so many years standing just outside the frame of every picture in this house, and for most of that time, I'd told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. My father was sitting in his chair when I came in. My mother on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap. They didn't look like my parents in that moment. They looked like people waiting for a verdict. "You should have come to us," my father said. His voice was flat, the bluster drained out of it. "We could have handled this privately." "You had 14 months, I said. That was private." "He's your brother." My mother's eyes were wet before she finished the sentence. "Whatever he did, he's still your brother." "I know that, and I'm not trying to destroy him. I'm refusing to carry the consequences of choices he made using my name. Those are different things." "Federal investigators." My father said it quietly. "The way you say something you are still trying to comprehend. Do you understand what that means for this family?" I looked at him. "I understand what it means for mine." I paused. "Dad, he registered $120,000 in debt under my Social Security number. He forged documents with my personal information. He ran a business in my name for over a year and never once thought to ask me, or warn me, or tell me, and both of you knew." I let that land. "When I drove here and showed you that envelope, you told me not to make it bigger than it needed to be. You told me it could hurt us. When was the part where either of you thought about what it was already doing to me?" My father looked away. It was the first time in my adult life I had watched him do that while I was speaking to him directly. My mother's voice broke. "I just want my family to be okay." "I want that too," I said. "I meant it, but I can't keep being the one who goes quiet so that everyone else gets to be okay. That chapter is finished." I didn't say it as a threat. I said it the same way I'd said everything else over the last 2 weeks. As a fact, stated plainly, some things simply become true. That was one of them. I left them there in the living room and let myself out through the front door. The afternoon light on the porch was bright and clean. I stood in it for a second before I walked to my car. The formal fraud determination from the lender arrived 6 weeks after my filings. The account had been suspended and referred for full review. The balance would not be held against my credit profile pending the fraud determination. I read the letter 4 times. One paragraph of corporate language that meant I was not going to spend the next decade untangling someone else's choices from my financial history. My credit report was corrected within the following month, and while I was in there, carefully reviewing every line, I found 2 small unrelated errors I'd never noticed before. Things that had been sitting there quietly, costing me points I didn't know I was losing. I corrected those too. The federal case moved the way federal processes move, methodically, without drama, one procedural step at a time. My brother retained an attorney. My parents cooperated with investigators regarding what they knew and when, which, I was told, narrowed the scope of their exposure considerably. I retained my own attorney throughout, which I'd recommend to anyone in a similar situation without hesitation. You need someone in your corner whose only job is to look out for you. Royce was formally charged: wire fraud, identity theft, filing false tax documents. The specific legal proceedings are still working through the system, and some details I'm not at liberty to discuss publicly. What I can tell you is that the fraudulent account has been formally attributed to him. The debt he ran up in my name is now a debt attached to his name. That is the part that matters most to me, practically speaking. Not the charges, not the legal calendar, but the fact that my name is no longer on something I never signed. On the morning the charges were formally filed, I was at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. My attorney sent a brief email with a case number and 3 words. "Moving forward, expected." I read it twice. I finished my latte. I went back to work. The following month, I closed on a condo in East Nashville. Top floor of a converted brick building. 2 bedrooms, windows that pull morning light in from 3 directions. I had been saving for it for 4 years, setting aside a fixed amount every single month with the same discipline I apply to everything else. I'd been pre-approved since spring. The closing had been delayed while the credit correction cleared, and the fraud documentation was fully reflected in my profile. The timing worked out so that I signed the papers and collected my keys during the same week the case formally moved forward. I drove past my parents' house on the way home that evening. I didn't stop. I looked at the porch swing, the flower boxes, the light in the kitchen window that meant my mother was probably starting dinner. I felt something I'm still working to name accurately, not anger, not triumph. Something more like finally closing a drawer that has been stuck open for a long time, and the quiet that settles in after. I want to be precise about one thing, because I've seen the word revenge come up when people hear this story, and I think precision matters here. What I did was not revenge. Revenge keeps the other person at the center of the story. It's about making them feel what you felt, suffer what you suffered. What I did was decline to absorb the damage. I reported a crime because a crime was committed. I protected my credit, my career, and my name because those things belonged to me. The consequences that followed belonged to my brother because he is the one who set them in motion. The difference between revenge and accountability is the difference between making someone pay and refusing to pay for them. I am clear on which one I did. My relationship with my parents is something I'm still navigating. My mother and I speak. Not easily, not often, but there are calls, there are occasional texts. My father has been quiet since the charges were filed. I'm letting that sit for now, without forcing it into a shape I'm not sure it can hold yet. I don't know what that relationship becomes from here. I know what it can't be anymore, and I think they know it too. What I do know, sitting in my home office in my own home on a Tuesday morning before I drive into work, is this. The people who lean on your patience, your flexibility, your lifelong habit of letting things go, they are counting on that habit being unbreakable. They're not wrong that you have it. They're wrong that it's unconditional. There is a point where absorbing someone else's damage stops being generosity and becomes something you are taking from yourself. Knowing where that line is and being willing to stand on your side of it is not cruelty. It is the most basic form of self-respect. If you've ever had to draw that line with someone you love, a sibling, a parent, anyone who was supposed to be in your corner, I want to hear about it in the comments. And if you're still in the middle of it, still asking yourself whether you're overreacting, whether the peace you keep is worth the price you pay for it, I'll say this. That stillness you feel when you're deciding. It's not confusion. It's clarity waiting for you to trust it. Trust it. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. I'll be back soon.